Long after Evelyn passed, Henry Morrow still lives inside the world. They built one steeped in memory, shaped by devotion, and held together by the quiet rituals of a promise not yet fulfilled. It was 6 to 13 a.m. when the kettle hissed to life on the old stove in room 4B of the Wilkson boarding house just outside Asheville, North Carolina. The November morning drifted in through the cracked window, cool and clean, the air carrying the faint smell of damp oak and chimney smoke. Henry Morrow, thin-stooped, 81 years old, moved slowly through the kitchen, every step measured, deliberate. His joints didn't complain as much these days. They didn't have the energy to. He reached for two mismatched mugs on the counter, just like he always did. One was a dull, navy blue chipped at the rim his. The other was cream-colored with a little green ivy design curling around the side. That one had been Evelyn's. He still set it down gently by the window, where the light touched just right. His hands shook slightly, so he gripped the handle tighter as he filled both cups. Sugar, no cream, just the way she used to take it. "Morning, Evie," he said softly. No one answered, but he didn't expect anyone to. The room smelled faintly of old books and lavender. A thin scarf, faded rose in color, hung from the hook behind the bedroom door. It hadn't been touched in over a year, not since Evelyn passed in her sleep on a gray April morning. The doctor said her heart simply stopped, as if it had finally grown too tired of waiting. He still made her side of the bed each morning, still fluffed the pillows just so. Her robe, pale blue with frayed sleeves, remained where she'd last left it. He could still see her in it, standing at the stove, humming gospel tunes, the morning light dancing off her gray curls. Henry sat down with both mugs, even though only one would be used. Outside, the world stirred, cars in the distance, a jogger's steady breath, a child on a bike calling for someone to wait up. Inside, time stalled. He took a sip and stared at the window. A bird, maybe a cardinal, landed briefly on the sill, then vanished. "You'd have loved that," he muttered, eyes glistening. He talked to her more now than when she was alive. He told her about the weather, about the supermarket running out of rye bread again, about how the television kept playing reruns of game shows she hated. He told her how people had stopped calling after the funeral, how their son Stephen only checked in once a month, how the mail came late now, even on Fridays. "Work was slow today," he said aloud, chuckling. "Not that I do any work worth mentioning. The truth was, there hadn't been work for years." Henry had once repaired small engines out of his garage, lawnmowers, hedge trimmers, old push blowers, quiet, honest work. But arthritis had crept in like a thief, and eventually the tools became too heavy, the parts too small. The garage was sold. The house followed soon after. They'd moved into this place, a rented room with a narrow bed, a compact stove, and a radio that only picked up 2 stations when Evelyn got sick. The cancer moved fast, like it knew time was already slipping. He remembered the night he found her crying quietly in the bathroom, the scarf tied tight around her scalp, her voice soft. "If I stop singing, Henry, I'll start slipping." So she kept singing, every morning, even on the hard days, especially on the hard days. Now he hummed for her. A melody, barely formed, drifted up from somewhere in his chest. It had come to him weeks after she passed, sitting alone on a bench near the church they used to attend. Just a few bars at first, then more. A verse about the door that never opened, the laugh that filled the floor. A chorus he whispered in the dark when sleep refused to come. Still alone, still afraid, holding on to yesterday. "I wear your smile, I keep your flame, and I still whisper your name." He didn't have a piano, never learned the guitar, but he had a voice, and though it cracked around the edges, it still held something. Evelyn once told him his voice had an ache that made people pause, even when they didn't know why. He hadn't sung in front of another soul since her funeral, but lately he felt something stirring like a wind nudging at a closed door. On his daily walks through town, he'd passed a sign taped to a storefront, "American Harmony Open Auditions. Ages 14 and up. All welcome." He remembered scoffing. "Too old," he'd muttered. "Too late." But the next day he passed it again, and again. By the 4th day, he stood there longer, reading every line. The audition date circled in red. December 4th, 9th a.m. at the WGRV studio in Charlotte. That night he sat by the window and unfolded a napkin where he'd written her lyrics. The scarf was folded neatly beside it. He touched both with the same care, like they might shatter if held too tight. "You said I had to keep singing," he whispered. "Maybe I still can." He didn't know what he was hoping for. Not fame, Not even applause. Just to be heard, to keep the promise, to sing the song. The mug by the window had gone cold. He didn't touch it. It wasn't meant to be drunk from. It was meant to be there, just like her. As the streetlights flickered on that evening, Henry stood by the window holding Evelyn's scarf, the melody rising once more in his throat, unfinished but alive. In his quiet room in Asheville, Henry Morrow still talks to Evelyn, his late wife. Her scarf hangs by the door. Her coffee cup waits by the window. A song lives inside him, a promise he intends to keep. One day he sees a poster for an open audition in Charlotte and decides to go sing for her. The cold clung to his coat like memory. It was still dark when Henry stepped off the 5:42 a.m. local bus, his knees stiff from the ride, the air in Charlotte thick with December frost. The sidewalk shimmered faintly under a set of flickering streetlights, and the city felt like it hadn't quite woken up yet. That was just fine with him. He preferred it that way. The studio sat off a narrow commercial block not far from the Riverwalk, nestled between a tire shop and a modern cafe where music already blared through speakers no one seemed to notice. A laminated poster hung crooked near the studio gate. American Harmony, auditions today. Red arrows pointed to a side entrance. He paused there for a while, just stood hands buried in his coat pockets, scarf tucked into his collar, watching the others arrive. They came in clusters, laughing excited, some nervously humming, some live streaming their arrival. They were kids mostly, teens and 20-somethings with perfect teeth and glitter eyeshadow, chasing dreams they'd rehearsed 1,000 times in their mirrors. Henry, on the other hand, wore a pair of threadbare gloves and a military-issue coat that had survived 3 decades longer than any of the contestants. He held no phone, no mirror, only a folded piece of paper. Contestant, Charles 2149, Henry Morrow. When he stepped forward toward the gate, a voice snapped sharp from his right. "This isn't a shelter, sir. You can't wait here." The security guard couldn't have been more than 25. Square jaw, starched uniform, polished attitude. Henry straightened not out of pride but habit. He had stood straighter under worse. "I'm not here to beg," he said simply, lifting the paper with 2 fingers. "I'm here to sing." The guard glanced down but didn't even take the slip from Henry's hand. He smirked. "You're kidding." "No, sir. I paid the entry fee." "Got the number?" "All proper." "Look," the guard said, shifting his weight and lowering his voice like he was doing Henry a favor. "This is a televised competition, not a charity spotlight." "Let's not." A second voice cut in. "Let me see the paper." It came from an older man, broad-shouldered, with a silver mustache and a dark overcoat that bore the weather of long years. His badge read, A. Simmons, Senior Security. He didn't smile, but his eyes were steady, kind. Henry handed him the slip. "Henry Morrow," the man read aloud. "Contestant 2149. "Yeah, he's on the overflow list. One of the late online entries." The younger guard squinted. "Seriously, I said he's on the list," Simmons replied with quiet finality. Then he turned to Henry and nodded once. "Go on in, sir. Check-in's just past the lobby. Good luck." Henry nodded back. He didn't say thank you, didn't gloat. Just walked past the gate the way he had walked through mud roads in Quang calm forward, carrying more than anyone could see. Inside the studio felt colder than outside. Glass and metal and humming wires filled the space with sterile energy. A giant hallway opened to rows of seats, benches along the wall. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. He found a seat between a boy with too much cologne practicing vocal runs and a girl in gold boots fixing her curls with a compact mirror. They looked full of tomorrow. Henry sat holding yesterday. Across from him, a teenager, maybe 16, looked up and tilted her head. "I like your hat," she said gently. "Looks experienced." Henry chuckled under his breath. "It's seen things." She smiled and tucked her phone into her sleeve. "Is your family here to watch you?" He paused. "In a way," he said. "She'll hear me if I sing loud enough." The girl blinked, unsure how to respond. But then she nodded slowly, as if she understood more than she let on. Time passed in slow ticks. Lights flicked above. Names were called. Dreams began and ended in 90-second bursts behind the red curtain ahead. Finally, someone called out, "Morrow Henry." He stood, his knees ached, but he didn't let them win. As he moved down the hallway, a young producer stepped into his path. "Need a backing track, Mr. Morrow." "Any accompaniment?" "No," Henry replied. "Just a microphone." And silence. The curtain ahead pulsed with warm light. Beyond it, the stage, the cameras, the shadowed faces of judges. But Henry wasn't thinking about them. He was thinking of Evelyn. He was thinking of her voice in the kitchen, her hand on his shoulder, her humming on the worst days. The scarf tucked into his inside coat pocket, soft and folded like she left it. He'd carried her with him for 14 months, through grief, through silence, through rooms that echoed too loudly with emptiness. He'd carried her here. Now it was time to open the door. And as Henry stepped toward the blinding light of the stage, his hand brushed the scarf in his coat and he whispered just loud enough for her to hear, "I'm here." Henry Morrow stepped through doubt and dismissal, past a young guard's scorn, and into the waiting arms of silence. He brought nothing but a scarf, a memory, and a promise. Now standing behind the stage curtain, he prepares to sing the song he wrote for Evelyn. The moment he stepped onto the stage, the light hit him like a wave. It wasn't warm. It wasn't kind. It was clinical, sharp, and sterile like an operating room. He blinked once but didn't raise his hand to shield his face. He had been blinded before by desert sun, by enemy flares, by headlights on lonely roads. This was just another version. In the dark beyond the lights, the crowd quieted. The chatter, the laughter, the tapping of phones gone. It was the silence of uncertainty, the kind people give when they don't know what they're about to see, but don't expect much. A judge's voice, polished and practiced, cut through the stillness. "Sir, would you like to introduce yourself?" Henry took one small step forward. He kept his hands clasped behind his back like he had during inspection days in the army. He cleared his throat softly. "My name is Henry Morrow," he said. "I'm 81 years old. I served as a military engineer. I'm not here for fame or fortune. I'm here to sing one song, a song I promised my wife I would share in front of as many people as I could." The audience didn't applaud. They didn't scoff either. They just waited, the same way Evelyn used to wait for him to finish his thought. No rush, just listening. The judge on the far left, a woman with soft gray streaks in her hair and hands folded like a prayer, gave a small nod. "You may begin when you're ready." Henry closed his eyes. He saw her. Not the Evelyn from the hospital bed. Not the woman cancer tried to unmake. No. He saw her in that diner outside Fayetteville, North Carolina. Peach pie on her tray, smile like a sunbeam cutting through fog. That was the moment, the spark. And then he sang. It wasn't perfect. His voice cracked early. His breath trembled on the second line. But he didn't stop, because the song wasn't built from technique. It was built from years, from hospital chairs, from whispered prayers, from hands held through nights too long to measure, still waiting at the door. "Where your laughter touched the floor, I set your cup down every day. Though your voice has gone away." There were no instruments, no digital beats, just the trembling, uneven voice of a man who had built and lost a world. He sang the chorus, and his knees gave slightly. But he caught himself. Still alone, still afraid. "Holding on to yesterday, I wear your smile, I keep your flame, and I still whisper your name." In the second verse, something shifted. The quiver in his voice evened out. His chest opened wider. It was as though Evelyn stood just behind the stage lights, humming along under her breath, just like she used to when folding laundry. Every line poured from a place untouched by time or death. He didn't perform the song. He relived it. When he sang the bridge, the words were quieter, tender. "You told me sing when I'm gone, so I built this song from dusk to dawn. And though the bed's grown cold and wide, you're still the fire I hold inside." By the final note, a strange hush filled the room. Not empty, not expectant, just still. He stood there, eyes closed, the microphone resting in his hands. He didn't bow. He didn't smile. He looked like a man listening for something no one else could hear. A chair scraped softly. Then another. Someone sniffed. A cough was muffled. Then came the applause. Not the sharp automatic kind. This applause grew slowly, like a tide gathering weight. First a few scattered hands, then more, then louder, then standing. Some clapped, some held their mouths, some simply stood and let the silence say more than noise ever could. One judge wiped her eyes with her wrist and didn't bother hiding it. The older male judge leaned forward, his voice no longer polished. "Mr. Morrow," he said quietly, "that wasn't just a performance. That was a conversation with someone you loved." Henry nodded. "She always said I talked too little," he said with a faint smile, "and sang too soft. I figured I'd fix one of those today." There was a long pause, but no one tried to fill it. Even the cameras seemed to lean back, letting the moment breathe. He wasn't handed a trophy. No glitter fell from the ceiling. There was no golden buzzer, no confetti, but none of that mattered. Between the first word and the final chord, he had fulfilled the only promise that counted. He had brought Evelyn into the light, and just maybe she had heard him. As Henry stepped off the stage, his fingers brushed the scarf tucked inside his coat, the same one Evelyn wore on her hardest days. And for the first time in a long while, he felt the weight of his grief lift, not vanish, but rise just enough to breathe. On a cold studio stage in Charlotte, Henry Morrow sang the song he had written for Evelyn, his late wife. It was not a performance, it was a vow fulfilled, witnessed by strangers who came to believe in the ache behind every word. He did not win a trophy, but he did win something else, a moment of stillness, reverence, and truth. By the time Henry stepped through the studio doors and onto the sidewalk, the rain had started. It wasn't heavy, just a soft, steady patter, the kind that sinks into old coats and memory alike. The city so loud earlier that morning now felt muffled under the hush of wet streets and gray sky. He pulled his scarf tighter and took a slow breath. No reporters waited outside, no cameras, no family. The hallway backstage had emptied quickly, the other contestants swept into dressing rooms and interviews, their stories just beginning. Henry had no press pass, no ride waiting, just the scarf, the folded lyrics in his coat pocket, and the feeling that something had shifted inside him. As he reached the end of the block, a voice called out behind him. "Mr. Morrow." He turned. A young woman, mid-20s at most, soaked halfway through and out of breath, ran toward him, holding something tightly in her hand. Her mascara had smudged slightly, but her eyes were clear. "I'm sorry," she said, slowing to a walk. I had to catch you." Henry gave a polite nod, unsure what to say. "I was in the audience," she said. "My mom loved music. She passed last month." She swallowed hard. "I haven't cried since the funeral. I couldn't. I was too angry, too tired. But tonight, your song." She held out a small folded piece of notebook paper, slightly damp at the edges. He took it gently. "I wrote this while you were singing," she said, voice breaking. "It's nothing fancy. But your voice gave her back to me for 3 minutes and 20 seconds. She was sitting beside me again." Henry opened the note. The ink had bled in spots, but the words were clear. "Thank you for remembering her in a way I couldn't. Your song reminded me who she was, and who I was when she was still here." He stood there in the rain, reading it twice. Then he tucked the paper beside Evelyn's scarf, right over his chest. "I don't know what to say," he murmured. "You already said it," the girl replied. "Every word of it." She gave a small wave, then disappeared around the corner, leaving only the soft sound of her shoes on wet pavement. Henry turned and began to walk. He didn't hurry. The rain didn't bother him. His shoes were already soaked. But something inside him felt lighter. Not empty. Just shared. He passed shop windows glowing yellow against the dusk. A boy inside a bakery pressed his nose to the glass, watching the water slide down like tiny rivers. Somewhere a dog barked. A bus sighed as it pulled away from a stop. No one knew what he had just done. But that didn't matter. A promise once kept doesn't require a crowd. Back at his boarding room, the air was still and familiar. He turned on the kettle, took off his coat and laid it across the chair, careful not to crush the note. He reached for the same 2 mugs, the navy one for him, the ivy one for Evelyn, set side by side near the window where the light had already faded. Only now he placed something new next to the mugs, a sheet of clean paper, blank except for a title scribbled across the top in careful block letters for the ones left behind. He stared at it for a long while, then reached into the drawer and pulled out a pen. The scarf hung behind the bedroom door, just like always. The radio buzzed faintly in the background, catching the end of a gospel hymn. And Henry, sitting by the window with steam curling from his cup, began to hum. He wasn't done. Maybe he never would be. But somewhere across the ache of missing and the quiet of memory, he had learned something. The weight of grief doesn't go away. But if shared, if spoken, or sung, it becomes a bridge, a legacy. And so as morning broke once more over Asheville's hills, Henry's song lived on, not in grand arenas or headlines, but in coffee cups, handwritten notes, and the hearts of those who, like him, were still waiting at the door.